Hi, we're Group 7 and we're doing Chapter 7, Performance Management and Appraisal. My name is Ashley Bakalarski.
My name is Cameron Schweitzer.
I'm Darren Sandstrom.
And I'm Cameron Pazinski.
So we're first going to talk about some important key terms that appear in the beginning of the chapter. The first one is performance management. That is the goal-oriented process directed towards ensuring that organizational processes are in place to maximize the productivity of employees, teams, and ultimately the organization as a whole. It is the single largest contributor to organizational effectiveness in recent years. And the next term is performance appraisal, and that is a formal system of review and evaluation of an individual or team task performance. Performance appraisal is critical to the success of performance management, and it's a high priority for management. And this is the performance appraisal process. I made this graph. So the first step is to identify specific performance appraisal goals, establish performance criteria and communicate them to employees, examine work performed, appraise performance, and discuss appraisal with the employee. Use of performance appraisal examples. So when talking about HR planning, the appraisal system should provide a profile of the organization's human resources, strengths, and weaknesses. And the example would be not enough workers equipped to enter management. So HR would make plans to focus on management development. And another example is training and development. And that should point out an employee-specific needs for training and development. And an example is if an evaluation reveals an employee is lacking a skill in a specific area, the training should then therefore focus on that area. And next, I'm going to be giving some definitions for performance criteria. Traits represent an individual's predisposition to think, feel, and behave. Behaviors are resulting from a variety of sources, including traits and situational context. Competencies refer to an individual's capability to orchestrate and apply combinations of knowledge, skills, and abilities consistently over time to perform work successfully in the required work situations. And these are all often used as performance criteria standards. Responsibility for performance appraisal. The HR department is usually responsible for coordinating the design and implementation of performance appraisal programs. Line managers must conduct appraisals and participate in developing the program. A statistic from our book stated that only 53% of employees get feedback from their managers. An immediate supervisor usually gives the performance evaluation. Others who may evaluate include peers, yourself, and customers. 360-degree feedback is feedback from everyone around the employee, so everyone else I previously talked about.
All right, next is choosing a performance appraisal method. First one would be a trait system. It asks raters to evaluate employees' traits and characteristics. The next would be a comparison system. It evaluates one employee's performance against other employees. Another one is behavioral system. It rates employees on the extent at which they display successful job performance behaviors. And then the last one is results-based system. It focuses on measurable outcomes such as individual or team sales, customer service ratings, productivity, and reduce incidents in the workplace. Some characteristics of an effective performance appraisal practice is reliable and valid, has to be reliable and valid. It meets job-related criteria, so it has to be relevant to the job. Clearly states performance expectation. It's standardized for all employees, and the appraisers have to be trained on how to do the appraisals, and continual open communication has to occur during the appraisal process. And you have to conduct performance reviews on the appraisals. And then due process has to occur for grievances over the appraisal process. Some limitations of the performance appraisals are appraisal discomfort, subjectivity of performance evaluations, There's bias errors, contrast errors, errors of central tendency, errors of leniency or strictness, and employee anxiety. Performance appraisal interview process. Scheduling, there needs to be a clear and concise time of the interview. You need to avoid cancellation or rescheduling. Interview structure, it needs to be structured as a problem-solving session rather than fault-finding and pointing the blame at the worker. Use of praise or criticism, do not just focus on negative or positive items. And then you have to be wary of the criticism that you give to the workers. Employee role, the employee should document every bit of work that they performed just in case it was missed by supervision and could be covered in the appraisal. And then concluding the interview, you want to end on a positive note and make sure the worker is not leaving with deflated ego, because that's going to hurt their performance.
All right, so we'll get into some behavioral systems now. So behavioral systems rate employees on the extent to which they display successful job behaviors. There are three main types of behavioral systems: critical incident technique, also known as CIT, behaviorally anchored rating scales, also known as BARS, and behavioral observation scales, or BOS. When correctly developed and applied, behavioral models provide results that are relatively free of rater error and biases. And then just a little bit more in depth on each type. So critical incident technique requires job incumbents and their supervisors to identify performance incidents that distinguish successful performances from unsuccessful ones. And then behaviorally anchored rating scales, based on the CIT, and the scales are based on the same criteria as well. Minus the exception, BARS incidents are written as an expectation to emphasize that the employee doesn't have to emulate the behavior exactly. So it's something they should strive towards, but doesn't have to be perfect as long as they're making a positive change. And then behavioral observation scales displays illustrations of positive incidents or behaviors of job performance for various job dimensions. The evaluator rates the employee on each behavior according to the extent to which the employee performs. And then some legal considerations. Employee lawsuits may result from negative evaluations, especially if they feel like there are biases involved. So mistakes in appraising performance and decisions based on invalid results can have serious repercussions. Legislation that prevents or prohibits illegal discrimination in employment practices also applies to performance evaluation practices as well. Employers can also be liable to negligent retention claims if they keep employees who continually receive unsatisfactory ratings and safety practices on payroll if said employee causes an injury. So that would leave the company liable. And then trends in performance. A survey done by Deloitte University revealed that 78% of HR professionals say that performance management is important. Some firms have transitioned to more frequent reviews that entail more frequent and developmental feedback instead of just a one-time, like once a year or once every quarter. It's more frequent, like bi-weekly or monthly. Firms who choose to do this tend to make pay raise decisions and promotions separately from these frequent reviews. By 2015, large firms have changed to systems that no longer include ratings, one of those being General Electronics, or GE. GE had previously used a forced rating system, and it actually caused the bottom 10% of those who had been scored very lowly to become discouraged, and they either left or were fired short after. Now they use a system where employees and managers share request feedback through an app called PD at GE. So it's more helpful for them in the long run.
All right, so this is our short video on the chapter.
Hi, today's bite is all about performance appraisal, what it is and how to implement it by looking at AIHR's top 5 best practices. Stay tuned. What is a performance appraisal? Performance appraisal is also referred to as the performance review, performance evaluation, and employee appraisal. Performance appraisal is a method to regularly evaluate an employee's job performance and overall contribution to the company in an effort to improve that performance. Performance appraisals help to provide feedback. It is a formal moment intended to evaluate job performance. It also helps in making key employee decisions, including giving bonuses, promotions, and firing. A crucial element of the employee appraisal is that it is a shared responsibility. On the one hand, it is a shared responsibility between the employee and manager. While the manager has the lead in this process, an active involvement of the employee creates the buy-in that is necessary to make the improvements that the performance appraisal is set up for in the first place. On the other hand, conducting performance management is also a shared responsibility between the manager and HR. The manager does the execution, but HR helps in guiding the performance appraisal process. What are the 5 key success factors of a performance appraisal? Every company conducts their performance appraisals differently. However, there are several best practices that every manager should know. 1, use a clear outline. Both managers and employees may feel uncomfortable during the performance appraisal. It is arguably the most formal setting they will be in all year, and it doesn't happen often enough to make it a common phenomenon. Using a job performance evaluation form or some other appraisal outline will be very helpful for both the preparation of the meeting and for doing the performance review itself. We attach a link to a performance evaluation form below as an example. 2, involve the employee as much as possible. One of the key challenges in employee appraisals is creating buy-in from the employee. This is backed up by science. A meta-analysis found a strong correlation between the participation of the employee in the performance evaluation and their buy-in. Employee participation is the extent to which employees are able to participate in the performance appraisal session. Employees who participated in their performance review were more satisfied, rated the session as much more fair, useful, and were much more motivated to improve. The meta-analysis we mentioned previously found that a high degree of employee participation explained up to 40% employee satisfaction, 35% of perceived fairness, 30% in perceived usefulness, and 19% in motivation to improve. This shows that it definitely pays off to involve the employee. 3, start with the bad news. Most of us have learned to start with good news before delivering the bad news and suggestions for improvement. According to Daniel Pink, employees are more satisfied when bad news is addressed early on in the interview. Positive information is then saved until the end, so the meeting will end on a positive note. 4, employees want more regular feedback. Getting feedback once a year is not something that will drive performance. Employees report they are looking for regular, continuous feedback to do their work better. Find ways to let managers touch base with employees continuously using technology. 5, carefully document your employee performance appraisal sessions. Important decisions about whom to promote, which salaries to raise, but also who to terminate are based on performance management information. Performance appraisal meetings should, therefore, be meticulously documented. Performance data should be assessed and reported in a standardized way across the organization and stored in a central database. This is also important when you switch to more continuous feedback. This wraps up our bite on the performance appraisal. In this bite, you learned what a performance appraisal is and 5 best practices to implement it in your own organization. If you want to know more about performance appraisal, check out our in-depth written article in the description link. Remember to stay up to date with our learning bites by subscribing to our channels. And if you like this video, make sure you like and share it. And I'll see you soon in our next learning bite.
Okay, so for our case discussion or our case study, are these things are a pain, and the overall view of the case discussion was Rajiv, who is a supervisor for a road maintenance crew for the Georgia Department of Highways. He and his crew were given a very heavy workload just as he was filing out his employee performance appraisals during the week that they were due. And then after finishing the heavy workload, Rajiv looked over the performance appraisals once again before submitting them and marked a specific worker, Joe Bloom, a lower grade than what he was given before. And then after marking Joe a lower grade, he also thought of another employee, his name being Roger Short. He had been goofing off on the job for that week where they had a heavy workload. And he thought that Roger would be mad if he were to receive a lower mark or grade than all the other workers on it. So he gave Roger the same grade as Joe so that they would be on equal terms, just to avoid confrontation in the workplace, because Rajiv was afraid that Roger would be definitely upset with his performance appraisal. Then for our discussion questions, number one, which performance appraisal is the most efficient and why? And then for the case study questions, what weaknesses do you see in Rajiv's appraisals? Should HR have the ability to insist that forms be completed right away? Because in the case study, they needed to be completed a specific due date, and that they were rushing Rajiv on when he should complete them. And then many employees would agree with Rajiv in saying that these things are a pain and he really shouldn't have to bother with them. What are the advantages in doing away with performance appraisals? And that is the end of our presentation. Thank you.